There's the horror, the reaction to the horror, and the reaction to the reaction to the horror. As more and more tales emerge of the savagery inflicted on civilians last Saturday by Hamas militants, as loved ones wonder if the missing are captured or dead, the grief and rage mount. As Israel mobilizes and seals off the Gaza Strip, will it be the prelude to an incursion, an invasion, an occupation? For the civilians on the Palestinian side, the nightmare is only at its beginning. And then there are the salvos that have been exchanged daily with Iran-backed militias across the border in Syria and Lebanon. Our correspondent in southern Lebanon earlier reporting how people are on edge there. How far will it escalate? Will it all draw in the superpowers? For the past 2 years, the focus has been on the U.S.-Russia showdown over Ukraine. Could Washington and its allies instead find themselves in direct confrontation with Moscow's ally, Tehran? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking how far it escalates. Joining us, he's a retired general whose past UN postings included Lebanon. Dominique Trinquant, your new book, What Awaits Us? The Unattended Consequences of Global Conflicts, is out tomorrow in French.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us here on France 24. From Jerusalem, France 24 correspondent Iris Mockler, who's been following it throughout. Thanks for joining us, Iris.
Pleasure.
From Beirut, reporter and documentary filmmaker Rania Abu Zaid. Good to see you.
Oh,
thank you.
And from London, journalist Tara Kangarlu, adjunct professor at Georgetown University, the author of The Heartbeat of Iran. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, the horror stories keep coming. So do the funerals, like the one that took place this Wednesday for 24-year-old Naeem. She was among the 260 killed last Saturday while attending the open-air Tribe of Nova music festival in the south of Israel. There are the dead and there are the missing, like Galit Dan Juai, whose mother and 12-year-old daughter were abducted from the Kisumin farming kibbutz near the border with Gaza and the Negev desert. She spoke to France 24.
C'est une horreur ce qui s'est passé là-bas. Le Hamas, je vous demande de libérer les otages, les enfants, les hommes âgés. Ma mère a 80 ans. Elle est très belle. Elle est une femme pleine de vie. Mais elle ne peut pas, sans manger, sans toilette, je ne sais pas comment ils les tiennent. Et s'il y a des femmes à Gaza qui me voient maintenant, prenez soin de ma fille, aidez-nous. Elle a besoin d'aide. Je dis, elles sont vivantes. Elles sont en bonne condition. Elles sont cachées quelque part. Et je suis sûre que quelqu'un les voit. Et je veux demander aux personnes qui les tiennent, laissez-les. Elles sont des civils, elles ne vous ont rien fait. On était toujours des gens de paix. On voulait la paix. Mon père toujours disait qu'il faut parler avec les Palestiniens. Je crois que vous avez droit à un pays à vôtre, mais pas sur la vie de ma fille et de ma mère. J'ai très peur. Où elles sont? S'ils vont tout casser à Gaza, ils vont aussi les tuer aussi. Comment ça va se passer? Vous rentrez dans le Gaza, vous tuez tout le monde, vous allez les tuer aussi. Aidez-nous, aidez-nous. Ce sont des enfants, des hommes âgés, des femmes âgées. Ils n'ont rien fait. C'est des civils.
That desperate plea from a mother and a daughter saying that once again that we've always been in favor of living in peace with the Palestinians, and that is a feeling that's shared, Iris Mockler, among many of those who live in those farming communities, those kibbutzes. They've always been advocates of a spirit of peace.
many of the people in that Gaza border community, I've actually interviewed many of them about this. You know, the women are in the Women Wage Peace, an activist organisation between Palestinians and Israelis. And one of those women, actually, I know, is now a hostage in Gaza. I did a story with other activists who are constantly in contact with the people on the other side of the border. It's the bitterest of ironies that these are the people who have been murdered in their beds, and that these are the people who are now taken hostage to share the fate of Gaza at the moment. You know, what a bitter fate that is. And I think leaving aside their political opinions, because it actually doesn't really matter. What matters is that people were living their ordinary lives on a Saturday morning, on a weekend, the last weekend of a holiday, actually, and many of them were murdered in the most brutal fashion. Some of them were dancing outside at a music festival. Others were just at home hiding from their murderers because they understood something was wrong. And some of them have been taken hostage into Gaza. And I think the impact of that on Israel has been so shocking. It's the largest single-day death toll in Israel's military history. The nearest one is now a third of that number, and they were mostly soldiers. These are mostly civilians. So I think the impact in Israel now is huge and will be felt for years.
Will be felt for years, and there is a feeling right now of baying for blood, of retribution. Gaza's main power generator is now down. The territory is out of running water. More tanks heading towards the border. 360,000 reservists called up by Israel. It's been a day punctuated on the Palestinian side also by funerals. Jean-Emile Jamin has more.
The sound of bombs echoes from the horizon. Just then, another explosion takes place directly above the town of Ashkelon. Rockets fired from the Gaza Strip, this time intercepted by the Iron Dome. But a children's hospital later takes a hit. The response on Wednesday is swift and massive. Israeli airstrikes have pummeled the besieged coastal region, smashing city blocks to rubble and demolishing whole neighborhoods like Al-Karama.
Total destruction. I came here in the morning and we found that everything was destroyed. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. It's cruel.
The amount of Palestinian bodies beneath the mounds of debris at this stage is unknown. After Saturday's bloody attack by Hamas, Israel has vowed a sustained war, even as the militants still hold scores of people hostage.
We've been striking Gaza for a couple of days already, very hard. Every place where we know there are Hamas activists, Hamas leaders, also if there are restrictions, we attack.
But with Gaza's civilian exits blocked off by both Israel and Egypt, safe areas are now nearly impossible to find. Hospitals are overwhelmed, water and fuel have been cut off, and the city's sole power plant has now shut down.
There are about 400 Palestinians killed over just the past 24 hours. We're talking about estimate exceeding of 263,000 people internally displaced within the Gaza Strip. The majority of them, 175,000, are seeking the shelter in UNRWA schools, which are the UN-administered schools.
The United Nations itself hasn't been spared, confirming that 9 of its staff working with Palestinian refugees have been killed in Israeli airstrikes since Saturday.
Dominique Trinquant, you and I remember, of course, the Paris attacks. 130 killed, which is half the number, died at that one music festival last Saturday. And the mindset we had here and the mindset we're seeing now between Israel and Gaza. What are your thoughts on if there's any way to avoid this escalation over a Gaza right now that's in the dark this Wednesday night?
No, I think it's very difficult to stop that. The shock in Israel is huge. I was talking to friends in Jerusalem, and they were talking that and they were not in favor of the prime minister, but they said the prime minister said that he will destroy Hamas, and I think that's the only objective.
Is it
Israel.
possible? Can they do it?
In military terms, with lots of difficulty, and probably a lot of wounded and killed in the Israeli army.
To destroy Hamas, do you need to send in the military?
Well, you need to go inside. You need to go inside Gaza, so it will be very, very, very difficult. But anyway, I think that after the shock, Israeli people, but we'll perhaps hear that from Israel, are ready for that. They say, we need to stop. It was beautiful to hear this woman talking about discussion between Palestinian and Israeli people. But the problem is that the Hamas doesn't want that. They don't want a discussion. They want to destroy Israel. They want to kill all the Israeli people. That's why they killed them in this kibbutz. And also they took hostages in order to have money to exchange or to protect them. But the problem is that currently, I think that this is not the aim of the Israeli forces. The aim is to destroy Hamas.
So to destroy Hamas, is it an incursion? Is it an invasion? Is it an occupation?
Incursion, certainly. And to destroy, you need to go everywhere in Gaza. That's why it will be difficult, because up to now, there have been only small incursion in Gaza. And the last one, I think, was with 150 Israeli soldiers were killed. So it will be a huge operation. But really, I think the mood of the Israeli have radically changed. You know that there were difficulty between the government and other people in Israel. Now they are no longer talking about that. We need to destroy Hamas, because if we don't destroy Hamas, it will come another time. There will come another time to kill us.
Here's Makler, the leader of the opposition. He's a former army chief of staff and who is now inside of what's being called an emergency government. Again, is it a given that there's going to be, as you just heard General Trinquant say, some form of an occupation?
I don't know about an occupation. I agree with the general that I think from everything that you hear, all the rhetoric is leading you towards a ground offensive. And I also agree with the general that the Israeli public is ready for it. You know, something snapped in the hearts of people here on this Saturday when the details came out and the death toll became known. And, you know, it's still rising, and it's all from that one day, because the wounded are so badly wounded, they simply don't survive. So I think there will be if you ask me to predict, I would predict there would be a ground offensive. But there are lots of options. You know, perhaps they will send the women and children out of Gaza now with its massive humanitarian crisis. Maybe they'll send them to Egypt and then they'll go in. It'll be a different kind of
Egypt has to say yes
operation.
for that to happen.
Egypt does have to say yes for that to happen, and they never have up till now. But if the humanitarian crisis, you and I were discussing a humanitarian crisis 2 days ago. It's now a humanitarian catastrophe. A place in this kind of situation without electricity, with the fuel for the generators, which will only be going to the hospitals at this stage. When that runs out, you know, it's the end. There's no water. These people, I think, will break down that fence.
It's not only about Gaza. The Israelis keeping an eye on their northern borders. There have been cross-border salvos keeping all sides on edge since last weekend. These are Tuesday images from the southern Lebanese town of Daria. Iran-backed militias also firing from Syria. Rani Abu Zaid, in the last hour, the Israeli army downplaying an earlier alert, saying that it's ruling out an aerial infiltration. Our correspondent, who heard sustained gunfire, later reporting that it was only in one direction. But people are on tenterhooks at this point. And from where you're sitting, what's the feeling in terms of are they just testing the waters, showing a bit of solidarity, or is this the prelude to something worse?
Well, things are moving very fast. Let me start with that. Hezbollah so far has been quite muted in its response relative to its capabilities, in the sense that it is choosing its targets quite deliberately. They are military targets. Its first strike was a few mortars across the border, or not actually across the border, a few mortars into Israeli-occupied Lebanese territory. And then we saw them fire a few rockets into Israel proper, but they are sticking to military targets at this point. So, there is an understanding that if this front opens, then it's a game changer. Hezbollah is not like the Palestinian factions. Hezbollah is better equipped, it is better trained, and it has far greater capabilities than the Palestinian factions.
Does Hezbollah want this fight?
They're waiting. Everybody's in a wait and see mode at the moment, and it depends on if the Israeli military goes into Gaza. It depends on what happens there, and it's not just Hezbollah. The Iraqi groups, some Iraqi groups, Iraqi militant groups have also said, they have also warned that that they may get involved in some way. They have said that American targets in the region, American interests in the region will become targets. So this has the potential to really spiral into something much bigger than what we're seeing at the moment.
The fact that right now Lebanese politics, domestic politics, are in such disarray, various parties unable to agree on choosing a new president, is that irrelevant for Hezbollah?
It's not irrelevant because Hezbollah has a number of considerations. First of all, it has its consideration as a resistance group, which is part of the so-called axis of resistance, which links Tehran to Lebanon's Hezbollah, to Syria's Assad, to some of the Iraqi militant groups, and also to Hamas. So there's that element of it. It also has domestic considerations in terms of its domestic political foes and the potential fallout if it ignites the northern front. And then there are, of course, the regional considerations, because, as I said, this will potentially draw in more than just Hezbollah.
General Tarkan, when you think back to your time in South Lebanon, this is just, I mean, we're back to talking about asymmetrical warfare after we've been talking about Ukraine fighting Russia.
Yeah, of course, in Gaza, it's completely different from the war in Ukraine. It's completely asymmetric war. I guess that's...
Is it the same with Lebanon?
Not exactly. And I guess that the Hezbollah, as it was said, is, of course, ready to fight, but I'm not sure convinced that they will do it. They will do it probably if Hamas has a very big difficulty in Gaza, and that Tehran, ask to open a second front to cause problem to Israel. And the use of Hezbollah is only to open a second front for Israel. And up to now, they haven't done that. And it was interesting to see that during this last day, nothing really happened. So I think that they are waiting to receive, say, an order, an indication that they need to open a second front. We don't know if it will happen.
For now, it's not happening. On Tuesday, Iran's supreme leader denying reports, particularly the one from the Wall Street Journal that stated it had orchestrated Hamas's surprise attack on Israel, complete with a final meeting a week ago Monday.
Supporters of the regime of Israel and some people within the usurper's regime itself have made false statements in the past few days and continue to do so. They say that Islamic Iran is behind this movement. They are wrong.
Tara Kangarloo, what's your reaction to that denial?
Francois, before I respond to that, I also want to take a moment and acknowledge the many hundreds of Israeli and Jewish people affected in Israel right now, and also the many Palestinians who are equally affected. And really, as we continue our coverage of this catastrophe and this humanitarian crisis, it is important that we emphasize that these are not just numbers. Those terrorized by Hamas and the Palestinians who are being killed in Gaza are victims of a war that has lasted a very long time, and these are not just numbers. These are people, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and that is incredibly important for especially the youngsters and the generations to come. And I have to say that this story has been quite emotional to watch and also cover to the extent that I have been. And looking at Iran, of course, the 85-year-old supreme leader, in that ceremonious fashion, spoke to the members of the armed forces and essentially denied their involvement with the terrorist atrocities of Hamas on Saturday. But of course, anyone who knows anything about Hamas and Iran's involvement in the region knows that Iran and the Islamic regime is one of the biggest sponsors of Hamas, as is to Hezbollah and other factions in Iraq and Yemen. So again, even if the Iranian officials deny it, everyone knows that Islamic regime too has blood on its hand for its many years of support for Hamas.
And does Iran want this fight at this time?
It's an important question. I think, as other guests said, so many players, including Iran, are waiting it out and sort of observing what's happening. But also you have to look at the Islamic regime standing domestically. We saw the protests last year that really shook the regime, that used all of its force in its arsenal to stifle any opposition, and that allows us to understand that the revolution and the regime is holding by a thread. They have everything to lose, and their main objective is their longevity and survival, rather. So they are not in a position to risk much. And also, Iran suddenly is having rapprochement with Saudi Arabia. That's something that they've been looking forward to, because again, it preserves their stability in the region. Everybody in the Middle East knows that Iran has played a rogue play, whether it be in Yemen, Syria, Iraq. So they have everything to lose and nothing to gain. And so Hamas certainly didn't need Iran's blessing, as many analysts and experts are saying, to carry out this terrorist attack. But of course, it gets a lot of support from Iran. And so Iran, at this moment, is not, I believe, in a position to go into a full-blown conflict, because it knows that if it does, all bets are off.
Rania Abu Zaid, you agree?
I don't know. It's difficult to tell, because the mood in the region, as I'm not sure what you're seeing on your screens, but here we're seeing entire neighborhoods in Gaza being turned into parking lots. We are seeing the families that are being murdered in their beds in airstrikes. We are seeing entire residential buildings just collapse. So, I mean, there are rules to war as well. And yes, it is an emotional time. And yes, it is, as one of your guests said, the mood in Israel is one of shock and calls for revenge. But there are also people, more than 2 million people in Gaza, and they have been trapped under siege since 2007. They are literally behind a wall that has been erected by Israel. They cannot move freely. The border crossing with Egypt has been closed, and so too have other avenues. So these people are trapped. So, that's what we're seeing on our screens here as well. And there's mounting anger at these scenes. So I wouldn't rule anything out at the moment.
That's watching those pictures, but there's the buildup that came before. General Trinquant,
yes,
the Wall Street Journal, in its reporting, and we talked about it in Monday's show, cited 3 sources, talked about specific meetings taking place in Beirut planning that may have lasted month up to 1 year before last Saturday's surprise attack. What do you make of what happened last Saturday?
Yeah, I think this was the achievement of a major plan, which was made for months, where you've got to gather all weapon system, to organize the attack, to train the people, and to prepare for the attack.
How did they do it when Israel's got such great intelligence?
No, the government of Netanyahu is guilty in that, because he was looking at Palestine, Cisjordania. He was not,
the West Bank.
West Bank. He was not looking at Gaza. He was in the mood of discussing giving money to Gaza and not giving money to the West Bank. And so this was why he was doing that, because he was trapped, or he was working.
Beholden to the extreme right elements from the settlements?
Exactly. And at the same time, so Hamas was preparing this attack. Even apparently last week, the Egyptian gave him the information, the intelligence, that there will be an attack. He was not listening. So the problem is that we have two radical sides, Mr. Netanyahu and the Hamas. And the Hamas want to fight, and Mr. Netanyahu take the opportunity.
Did Iran orchestrate it?
Yes, probably Iran help anyway. Sure, was helping Hamas. Hamas is not able alone to have all this weapon system and to organize all that. So it was organized. What is interesting, that the meeting was in Beirut, and nothing happened with the Hezbollah currently. So that's why we are waiting. Because will there be a second shock, when Israel will go into Gaza? Opening a second front will be terrible for Israel.
Iris Makler, earlier in Washington, there was an intelligence briefing for lawmakers in the U.S. Congress. The chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee came out of it saying, yes, the Egyptians, we don't know at what level, but they did warn Israel 3 days before last Saturday.
Yes, and Egyptian sources are confirming it now. It was originally one Israeli newspaper in a general way. Then it became a second Israeli reporter who's got very good sources in the Arab world. And she said it was the security information minister of Egypt, the legendary Abbas Kamel, and he was the one who called in and called Netanyahu himself 10 days before and said something big is brewing in Gaza. And Netanyahu brushed him off, according to this account. And now we hear it confirmed from Egypt, and now we hear it confirmed from the US. And I think what's interesting is that Netanyahu jumped in with both feet to deny it immediately because of the damage, of course. The question being asked here is, how was this possible? And perhaps part of the reason is political. It's not just an intel failure. It's not just a military failure. It's a political failure. So he jumped in with both feet to deny it, but it's being reported broadly everywhere here. And I think the question is what damage it will do him.
Well, for now, his job is safe, isn't it? After all, we've just seen him agree with the opposition on an emergency cabinet.
Well, his job must be safe. I mean, you can't remove a prime minister mid-war, can you? I don't know, or at the beginning of a war. So I think the reckoning will come at the end of this. I mean, I read furious accounts from people who say, we don't want to wait till the end. We actually want the reckoning now. But saner heads prevail and say, just wait, we will deal with him. I read this daily, discussions on the radio, reading it in translations of the Israeli newspapers, people saying he may not realize it, but his political career is over. You cannot survive a failure like this. And looking back 50 years to the Yom Kippur War, which was very similar in the level of shock, took longer there was a real sense that Israel might not survive. Then Israel did survive, and in the end, the Prime Minister paid the price. So I think that's the writing on the wall for this Prime Minister.
On Tuesday, Israel's leader again turned to his closest ally on this point.
Hello, Joe.
Yet Joe Biden pledging more aid after that telephone call with Benjamin Netanyahu. The U.S. quick to dispatch weapons and deploy its largest aircraft carrier to the region, this with an eye to supporting Israel and sending a message to its main foe.
Let me say again, to any country, any organization, anyone thinking of taking advantage of this situation, I have one word: don't. Don't. Our hearts may be broken, but our resolve is clear.
Now, Tariq Angerloo, in that speech, Joe Biden didn't say the word Iran. His top general did this Wednesday, specifically warning Iran. Let me ask you, you heard General Trinquant earlier stating that he thinks Iran did have a hand in the preparations for what happened last Saturday. Could it be that Tehran wanted to make mischief and succeeded too much?
Again, I just want to emphasize that Iran certainly did have a hand because they are the biggest supporters of Hamas, and they have been over the years. And the point is, whether or not that meeting in Beirut took place or not, directly or indirectly, Iran has been involved and is involved and will continue to be involved. And so the terror that comes out of Hamas is in ways coming out of Iran. So that's the point I wanted to make. And yes, of course, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is en route to Israel. I don't know if he has arrived yet or not. UK top diplomat is there as well. So the United States sent an incredibly strong stance against Iran, whilst President Biden not mentioning the name. But everybody knows how involved Iran is, again, whether it be in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, or with Hamas. We also do know, though, that the United States has been very careful. Again, we are going into a presidential election, and I do believe that the Biden administration is very careful how they piece this puzzle together. Of course, so much of it depends on what happens in the coming days. I also read that the leader of Hamas just called the day of jihad on Friday. I don't know, maybe your correspondents on Friday in Jerusalem and Lebanon can confirm this. But again, what we're hearing is so much chaos out of this terror organization that begs us think anything is really possible, and the United States is certainly on standby.
And what is interesting here, there's a lot of criticism of the U.S. president for being old. He's 80. But he's an old Cold Warrior, knows how to speak the language of deterrence. And we heard it there. Those are the kind of words you would hear from U.S. presidents during the Cold War in his language. The U.S., which according to the Israelis, is considering sending a second aircraft carrier if needed. Your reaction to that?
No, I think, Israel needs ammunition, certainly, and that's what the U.S. usually provide, intelligence and ammunition. The aircraft carrier, in the Mediterranean, there is an aircraft carrier. You deploy it not very far. It will provide intelligence also. So that's very useful. The second one, I don't see the point.
It's an expensive ship just for intelligence gathering.
Yeah, exactly. But exactly. But Mr. Netanyahu wants to show that he's completely supported by U.S. That's why he showed this picture, phoning to "Hello, Joe." That's the way he wants to show that, we've got this powerful friend which is supporting us, and they will add many things. But just remember one thing. Netanyahu is talking about revenge. For a state, you don't have to think about revenge, but to protect. And he make a big mistake without protecting Israel. So he can speak about revenge. It's a big failure for him.
Rania Abu Zaid, again, we're back to this kind of Cold War sort of showdown that we're witnessing. Your thoughts on that?
You're right, in a sense. The world is taking sides. The countries of the world are taking sides on this. But a point on the aircraft carrier, perhaps the message that the U.S. intended to send isn't exactly being received the same way here. In some quarters, it's viewed as a sign of weakness that the Israelis need the Americans to present what they think is a show of force because they can't take on a militant faction on their own. So, you know, messages are received in different ways. There are certainly people who are taking the carrier in that vein.
And Ronnie, a second element out of Washington in the last minutes, the U.S. says it's working with Israel and Egypt on safe passage for Gaza civilians. And again, that's the old role that the U.S. used to play, the main backer of Israel, but also the one who could mediate. Your thoughts on that?
Mediate what? You know, the U.S. is not viewed as a neutral partner here in the region. It is very much, as you said, viewed as the backer of Israel, as it's not an impartial mediator. But definitely, if they can help get some of the civilians out, as I mentioned before, they are trapped. There are more than 2 million people in there. That will surely be welcomed by some of the families that are under bombardment tonight.
Most NATO allies are standing by the United States. Most, but not all.
Amerika'nın uçak gemisinin İsrail'de ne işi var?
What business does America's aircraft carrier have in Israel? What is it coming to do?
Buraya gelen uçak gemisinin
And what is the aircraft carrier that is coming here with all its boats around it and the jets on the aircraft carrier going to do?
gemisindeki uçaklarıyla ne yapacak?
It is going to hit all of Gaza, its surroundings, raise them to the ground, and commit very serious massacres.
İndirerek çok ciddi katliamlara adım atacak.
Iris Makler, what's Turkey's role in all this?
That's a good question. As an observer from the outside, Turkey used to have a much closer relationship with Israel, as you know. Then it was the election of Erdogan that changed things. There was that very long cold period, and then it's come back. There's a rapprochement with Israel, certainly. Nevertheless, despite all that, there's that relationship between the Muslim Brotherhood and Erdogan. And I think that's why he is always supportive of the Palestinians and particularly also supportive of Hamas. So can he would be a more likely mediator, actually, you know, I'm just thinking this through, than any American influence. Perhaps if there was anybody who was going to help as well as Egypt in order to get safe passage or in order to smooth things for the hostages, perhaps, if you wanted an external player, it might be Turkey.
And that's what some reports are suggesting already. Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar acting as mediators. By the way, Dominique Trinquant, Erdogan, in those remarks that he made on Tuesday, seemed angrier at the United States at times than he did at Israel, after the downing of a Turkish drone in northeast Syria last week. Again, your thoughts on Turkey's role again?
The Turkey's role, we must remember that it's close, Erdogan is close to Muslim Brotherhood, but also that it's a Muslim country, and all the leaders in the country, in the Muslim country, must be careful because of the what we call the La Rue Arabe, the Arab streets, the Arab streets, because they are very supportive of Palestine. Very supportive of Palestine, so they must be careful. You know, with the Abraham agreement, lots of the Gulf countries were talking or even have an agreement with Israel, but the people, not the leaders, but the people have a different point of view. They are supporting Palestine. The problem is that they need to realize that Palestine is not Hamas. No, Palestine is to build another state, two states inside with Israel and with Palestine, whether when Hamas doesn't want Israel, want to destroy Israel. So that's a bit different. And we need to talk to our people to tell them that they are right to want a Palestine country, but not to destroy Israel. It's a different way.
Tara Kangaluru, this is all coming this war between Israel and Gaza and between Israel and Hamas is coming just at the moment when Israel looks set to deepen ties with Saudi Arabia. Surely that timing is fortunate for the Iranians.
It's very interesting. It's fascinating because some observers are saying that this was Iran's direct doing to deflate these talks and prevent this rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and that is of course on the back burner for Netanyahu right now, presumably. I also want to just emphasize on the role of Qatar right now. A lot of Hamas leaders, in fact, live in Qatar. Qatar has always been a big player. They've played a big role between Fatah and Qatar years ago, and they've also been a key player in providing humanitarian aid. So I do want to bring attention to the role of Qatar and the role that they will play in the coming days. And also, we're reading reports of them being involved in hostage negotiations and the release of the hostages. So they too are an important player. But Francois, you mentioned the people, and I want to bring your attention to the people of Iran. And if you look actually at the sentiments of Iranian people, both inside and outside, they have been very much outspoken once again against the Islamic regime and its support for its proxies in the region, in this case, Hamas. There's a sort of famous slogan that Iranians say. It says, na Gaza, na Lebanon, janam fadai Iran. No to Gaza, no to Lebanon, my life be for Iran. And that, again, is reflective of the sentiment of the majority of the people in Iran, more than 80 people who are so tired of the Islamic regime's involvement in the region as a rogue actor at the cost of their livelihood, at the cost of the betterment of life for them. And so I think it's fascinating to look at how the Iranian people are reacting to all of this. And any moment and any opportunity they get on the international stage to express their fatigue and resentment towards the Islamic regime's behavior, they certainly do take. And the events of the last few days have reflected that as well.
Yeah, we saw jeers at a football match when one side brought out a Palestinian flag. The other side told them where to put it. One final thought. At a meeting of NATO defense ministers in Brussels this Wednesday, the U.S. Defense Secretary reiterating support for Israel. And look who's sitting beside him, Dominique Trinquant. Suddenly, we're not talking about Ukraine so much. And clearly, Volodymyr Zelensky is worried. Munitions. Those munitions for Israel, are they at the expense of Ukraine?
No, ammunition, I don't think so. I mean, the ammunition for Israel are the Iron Dome, sorry. And that's not exactly what is used in Ukraine. But I think that is wondering about the support of US generally, because US will support, with no doubt, Israel. So there will be probably in the future something like which will show that the US will say, okay, it's no longer our problem, Ukraine is no longer our problem. It's problem of Europe and not of US. That's the first point. Second point is that Russia is using the crisis currently to show that it's supportive of Palestine. And Mr. Hamas will be in Moscow in a few days.
Yeah, President Putin said this was a crisis of the U.S. is making because they tried to go it alone.
The old language, we're going back
from the Soviet times.
For the Soviet time, where Russia is supporting the Palestine and U.S. is supporting Israel. So this is used by the Russian currently.
Back to the Cold War in more ways than one. Dominique Trinquant, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank as well our correspondent Iris Mockler in Jerusalem.